At this point, I've gone ahead and removed the 4 sheets of paper that we've coated and brought them into a finishing room where we're going to be pressing them with a hot mounting press. If you don't have access to a hot mounting press, the best other option, instead of just waiting for 2 weeks for the albumin to cure, would be to use an alcohol solution. When you use the alcohol solution, you need to mix it with a 15% salt solution, so that as it gets soaked, some of the salt's going to leach out of the albumin, so we want to make sure that it's replaced back at an equal capacity into the paper. Once it's been soaked for 15 seconds in the alcohol solution, rehang it, allow it to dry again, and then do the second coat. But what happens a lot of times is it gets kind of a little bit wavy, and so since we have to float it again a second time, if you have access to a dry mounting press, I think it's a better way to go ahead and cure it. I'm going to put it inside the dry mounting press at about 220 degrees and allow it to stay in there for about 5 minutes to completely kind of harden, so that when we go and we put it back into the albumin, that it will stay on the surface. If you don't cure it in one of the two methods, the albumin will lift off and you'll end up with just a single coat. So you need to do one of the two. So at this point, I'm going to put it inside a paper. We'll look at that and get it inside the press. I've gone ahead and removed a sheet of butcher's paper and folded it in half. And I'm simply going to take each of our sheets of paper, and we can easily tell which is the front and which is the back by looking at the T. And we'll place it face up and place it inside of our butcher's paper in the center. You'll notice the paper is not very wrinkly because the way that we have dried it using the mounting press or the hanging rack, it allows it to actually dry relatively flat, which will minimize the amount of flattening that we'll need to do. So we'll get the 4 sheets in there. We're going to lay the piece of paper on top of it. And I do this face up. From a lot of the reading that I've done, it shows that when they used to manufacture the albumin paper, they would actually put it through a heat press and kind of burnish. They would flatten it at the same time. So pressure on the front surface is a good thing. So doing it face up will be the best way. Now we'll move that into to the heat press. So here's our mounting press. I'm just simply going to take the sheets of paper that we've already laid out, bring it over as one piece of paper, and slide it down here through the middle. If I did have excessive curling, I would very carefully put my hand in here and make sure that it's kind of laying flat as we go to lay it in there. Otherwise, what we want to make sure that we avoid is any curling or wrinkling of the paper. If it's too curly and we go to press this down, we don't want it to fold over. Once we know it's in there and it's laying flat, just gently start to bring this down on top of the paper and press it and kind of lock it into place, and then allow it to sit for the 5 minutes. So it's been 5 minutes. We're going to go ahead and remove the paper from the press. And as we do that, just be careful, it's hot. Slide your hands kind of from the outside and bring out the paper all together. And we're going to actually be moving this into another press that's cooled for the cooling process. So over here we're really fortunate, we have a second press. Because it's already cool, we can just slide it directly inside and allow the paper to finish cooling inside of the cool press. This will help ensure that as it dries the rest of the way or cools back down, that it cools flat. It has a tendency, if we take it out and just allow it to sit in the regular air and the moisture, that it will start to curl back some. So this will help ensure that we get nice and flat prints, which will help us when we go to the next step of doing a second coat of albumin. It'll be that much easier because it won't be curly. So we'll leave it in there for about 3 minutes and then we'll take it out nice and cool. So now the prints have been cooled. I'm going to go ahead and bring them back over to the table. And they cool really quickly and evenly that way because the cool part of the steel helps kind of pull off the heat. So at this point we can go ahead and take out our prints, and you'll notice they're nice and flat, and we'll then be able to take those back into the other room and do another coating of the albumin. And that will be the last part of preparing the paper to be sensitized by silver. So there's our flat paper, and we'll go to the next room. So now that we've got our first coat that's been cured, we're ready to now coat the second part. So again, we're going to need to wet the back surface. So I re-wet the paper towels. We want to make sure there's not any water on the surface of the plexiglass. So just take a quick paper towel, wipe that off, because now there is albumin on that front side, so we don't want that to get wet. And then just take one of our sheets of flattened cured paper, lay it face down. You can see this is the back side with the T. We'll just lay it in place and then move the paper towel over that back surface. And then again, kind of smooth it out so that it gets a nice contact with the paper. And we'll leave it on there for a couple of minutes, and then we will move it over into the albumin and float it for a second time. So as we're waiting for our paper to moisten, you'll notice we do have some bubbles on the surface of the albumin. So let's take just a minute and go ahead and remove those. And again, I'm just going to use our stainless steel spoon and just gently kind of move those off the side of the surface. If you want to remove them completely, you can kind of tap them out into the sink. And so I'm just gently scooping and moving that off to the side. Any of those air bubbles, if they stay on the surface when we go to coat our paper, they're going to get trapped underneath the paper and just prevent the albumin from getting in contact with the paper. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now that we've moistened the back side of our cured paper, we're going to go ahead and float it for a second time. And again, make sure that you kind of ease the edge of the paper away from the surface so that you don't have any kind of curls or dips in the paper. Try to make it as smooth as possible so that the albumin can't float over that edge. And then we're going to just gently lay that into the paper, into the emulsion, and allow it to float again for another 3 minutes. Okay, and once it's in and been released, just gently ease the edges of the paper down into the albumin so that it gets in contact with it. Obviously be very careful not to push it down so much so that the albumin comes up over the top. And then we'll let that soak for 3 minutes and pull it out and get it hung up with the other sheets of paper. So now that our second coat of albumin's been soaking for 3 minutes, we're going to go ahead and remove it from the tray. And as we do that, we just want to gently lift one edge and smoothly lift it out so as to not get any of the albumin onto the back side of the paper. And because this is our second coat, we just want to ensure that we take a look at the back and make sure that we have the T facing at the bottom. So we're just going to rotate this around so that the T is going to be at the bottom, not at the top. And then when we hang it up in our drying rack, it'll be facing the right direction so that we get a nice smooth surface. So at this point, my last sheet is in the albumin getting its second coat. And once it gets hung up, I'm just going to let those dry overnight. And the coated pieces of paper can last for months and months. So I'm just going to hold on to those until it's time to actually expose them. And at that point, sensitize them right before use. It's always kind of best to use the silver as fresh as possible. It is possible to use it days later, but I've noticed that I have a tendency to get a little bit more both value and color in the highlights if it's been days since I've sensitized the paper. So I'm going to wait and hold on to the paper until I'm ready to use it, soak it in the silver, and then use it right away within, a couple of hours. So that'll kind of cover this section, and we'll go over how to coat the paper with the silver and how to do all the processing in the next section.